Welcome back to Starlight Sci-Fi, where humanity takes center stage among the stars. If you're into epic tales of survival, bravery, and human defiance in the face of the impossible, make sure to hit that subscribe button and join the crew. When the medics of the Galactic Union brought the unconscious human aboard their ship, they thought they were rescuing a fragile creature from a brutal crash. What they didn't know was that they were about to witness the most terrifying medical miracle in the history of interstellar medicine. And it all started with blood. Blood that didn't behave. The distress signal was faint, buried beneath layers of static and cosmic interference. If not for a passing cargo hauler that relayed the echo through a secondary relay buoy, it might never have been found at all. But fate, or something stranger, had other plans. The source was traced to Sector Theta 9, a desolate region near the rim of Galactic Union space. The system was unremarkable, a dead gas giant with a cluster of frozen moons, all without atmosphere, water, or any sign of habitation. No known routes passed through it. No species claimed it. It was the kind of place most travelers avoided without needing a reason. Yet here, buried in the icy crust of the barren moon, was a single escape pod, scorched on one side, crumpled from a high-speed impact. The surrounding terrain showed no tracks, no signs of approach or departure. It was as if the pod had simply fallen out of the sky and given up. The Galactic Union medical frigate Colaris arrived within 30 minutes. The medics aboard were trained in dozens of physiologies, fluent in more than 150 emergency protocols. They had revived species with liquid metal circulatory systems and saved a diplomat who had been poisoned by his own exhale breath. Nothing shocked them anymore, or so they believed. As the retrieval team cut through the warp hatch, they braced for remains. Exposure to vacuum, intense cold, and a lack of any life support for even an hour would have killed most known life forms. But the sensors picked up a flicker, something just above zero. A pulse. Inside, the pod was a mess. Panels were melted from power surges. The oxygen tank had ruptured long ago, and a cracked visor lay near a partially collapsed command chair. In that chair was a single human male, strapped in, slumped forward, barely breathing. No identification, no insignia, no transmission logs. The pod's data core had been wiped clean, intentionally. Whoever he was, he hadn't wanted to be found. Despite the conditions, his vitals, what few the scanner could detect, showed signs of persistence. Core temperature was dangerously low, yet his organs hadn't shut down. His heartbeat was faint but steady. They ran a full scan twice, thinking it was a glitch. But the results were the same. He was alive. The rescue team rushed him aboard, placing him in a cryostabilization bay. As his body thawed slowly, the medical team began preparations for emergency treatment. They activated the nanomet array and scanned for internal damage. Fractures in multiple ribs, internal bleeding, mild brain trauma, deep lacerations across his legs. It was a miracle he was breathing at all. But what they didn't know, what none of their equipment could yet detect, was that the miracle wasn't in his survival. It was in how he was surviving, and what was happening inside his body wasn't healing. It was war. In the pristine sterility of the Colaris medbay, the human was prepped for standard trauma care. Robotic arms positioned scanners and sterilizers, while the Union medics hovered at a respectful distance. Even for a Deathworlder, he was in critical condition. Internal injuries, multiple ruptures, nerve inflammation, and extreme cold exposure all pointed toward a narrow window for intervention. Following protocol, a Class 3 probe incision was selected to introduce regenerative nanomeds directly into the bloodstream. It was a routine procedure, small, controlled, and painless. The automated arm extended the scalpel toward the patient's forearm. The moment the blade touched the skin, the anomaly occurred. A hair-thin slice opened beneath the edge of the tool. Blood welled up and then instantly stopped. Not because of any clamp, not because of any medication. It stopped because the blood had already clotted. There was no slow seep, no pooling, no time for reaction. Within half a second of exposure, A transparent seal formed over the incision site. The medical staff stared in disbelief as the clotting agent hardened with a precision that rivaled synthetic bandage tech. They initiated a second attempt, this time on a different limb with a sharper instrument. The result was identical. Each cut was immediately sealed from within, the clot not just halting blood loss, but forming a semi-permeable membrane. Oxygen and nutrients continued to pass through. It wasn't merely repair, it was regulation. The machines, designed to diagnose and adapt across 100 biological frameworks, began to falter. The readings made no sense. The blood's platelet count exceeded the theoretical limit for any known species. The response time between injury and clotting was mathematically impossible. One medic began running an internal simulation to replicate the clotting behavior under laboratory conditions. The result: no known substance could react with such efficiency without artificial assistance. The only conclusion was that this wasn't just a strong immune response. It was something more. Some suggested the blood had been engineered, but scans showed nothing synthetic. No nanites, no foreign DNA. This was natural human biology, unaltered, untouched, operating on a level the Union had never encountered. The incident triggered a silent unease among the team. The med bay, once humming with quiet activity, grew still. Machines beeped cautiously. The medics reviewed the footage again and again. Each time, the moment the scalpel touched skin, the same immediate clot. Each time, the same feeling. This was an error. It was deliberate, designed, like the blood had rehearsed the process millions of times before and knew exactly how to respond. In the sterile quiet, the realization began to settle. This wasn't a quirk of evolution. It was a warning. The blood didn't just stop bleeding. It told them, don't try that again. After the incident with the clotting blood, the medbay aboard the Colaris drifted into a quiet state of unease. Every medic on board had seen strange things in the line of duty. Species with gelatinous organs, symbiotic twins that shared a bloodstream, even creatures that metabolized sound. But none of that compared to what was lying on the surgical table. Protocol demanded a secondary assessment. A full physiological and genetic analysis was initiated. The scanners, advanced enough to deconstruct a species' entire biochemistry in under 10 minutes, began processing the human's cellular data. It didn't take long before the console flagged a priority alert. Red storm anomaly detected. That term hadn't been used in centuries. Most current medical AI didn't even recognize it at first. A deep dive into legacy systems revealed the meaning: a biological reaction classified as an adaptive threat to external intervention. The red storm anomaly had only appeared once before in recorded history. It was found in the now extinct Parakian species, whose bodies could reroute internal systems in real time to counter poisons, injuries, and invasive scans. The Parakians had died out during the Great Collapse, and their abilities were long considered a one-time fluke of nature. Yet here it was again in a human. The blood clotting was only the surface. What lay underneath was even more unsettling. Microscopic imaging revealed an internal system reacting to their presence. Muscle tissue was subtly tightening, not from stress, but from controlled preparation. White blood cells weren't just multiplying. They were adjusting size, forming temporary groupings, almost like squads. The human body was not recovering from injury. It was strategizing. Further investigation revealed an even stranger pattern. The DNA, initially assumed to be stable, showed signs of real-time restructuring. Not mutation, adaptation. A specific sequence near the immune cluster region had shifted during treatment. In simple terms, the body had recorded the medic's intervention and learned from it. A chemical marker had been created at the incision site. Later tests showed the same marker had appeared in another location, one they hadn't touched. The body was replicating a tactical memory of its injuries and preparing future responses. This wasn't evolution. Evolution required generations. This was instantaneous, reactive, For the first time, someone looked into the ancient archives under the Earth file, cataloged under Homo sapiens, origin, Sol 3 designation, Category 9 Deathworld. It was a classification most Union scientists had long dismissed. Death worlds were often dramatized by explorers and traders, and Earth's entry was over a century old. Few had even bothered reading it. But now, they read every line, and what they found changed everything. Earth was a planet of atmospheric instability, apex predators, disease, saturation, tectonic volatility, and extreme seasonal variation. Its dominant species, the humans, hadn't survived despite these conditions. They had thrived because of them. The medics glanced back at the unconscious form on the table. He wasn't just injured. He was evolving mid-treatment. The medbay lights dimmed slightly as the human's vitals spiked without warning. His core temperature began to rise. Fast. The monitors blinked red, casting urgent flashes across the metallic walls. In most species, such a temperature would be a death sentence. Proteins would begin to denature, neural activity would falter, organs would begin the slow cascade into shutdown. But the humans' readings told a different story. The heat wasn't spreading chaotically. It was focused, targeted, controlled. Thermal maps showed cellular clusters along the spine, lungs, and lower abdomen burning at more than double the safe threshold. At first, the medics suspected internal infection or perhaps a neurological misfire. But the scans didn't align with any known pathology. Then came the first true revelation. Dead and damaged tissue, any cell flagged as compromised by the body's immune network, was being incinerated from within, not broken down, not recycled, burned. On a microscopic level, mitochondria were releasing rapid bursts of energy in a controlled detonation, reducing cellular waste to ash. The process didn't trigger pain responses. In fact, the nervous system was suppressing them. Nerve clusters rerouted around the affected zones, allowing the regeneration process to continue uninterrupted. No species in the Union possessed anything close to this biological precision. Even the medics, trained in logic and biology, couldn't help but feel a flicker of unease. They were witnessing a body that refused to die, even when biology said it should. The lead analyst began compiling the process as an undocumented form of thermal autophagy, a biological self-cleaning system using internal combustion instead of chemical absorption. It was faster, more violent, more deliberate. Another medic suggested that the temperature rise might be a last-ditch attempt to destroy invasive nanotech, like a defensive fever response. But no nanotech had been introduced yet. The probe never made it past the skin. Whatever this was, it wasn't an attack. It was a routine response. The machines monitoring cellular regeneration began falling behind. Healing was happening faster than the processors could log it. Torn muscle fiber had already begun knitting together. Swollen tissue was shrinking. Brain scans showed inflammation being reduced with surgical accuracy, even as the surrounding cells prepared secondary contingencies. A pattern began to form. A system, almost military in nature. The body wasn't just surviving. It was running an operation. Triage, elimination, repair, reinforcement. The medics realized they weren't observing healing in the traditional sense. They were witnessing a kind of tactical biology, as if each part of the human's body had been trained for combat, not metaphorically, literally. Every system responded with a battlefield mindset: minimize losses, reestablish function, prepare for the next strike. And perhaps most disturbing of all, the body wasn't reacting to its injuries alone. It was reacting to the medic's presence, as though it had already assessed the environment, judged it potentially hostile, and adjusted accordingly. The man wasn't conscious, but he wasn't defenseless either. Even unconscious, his body was fighting a war they didn't understand, and it was winning. By now, the human was no longer just a patient. He was a phenomenon, a medical event, a biological paradox, wrapped in flesh. The medics aboard the Colaris had stopped referring to him as the subject or the survivor. Now, They simply called him the anomaly. What began as a rescue had become a containment effort. The med bay, once a sanctuary of precision and certainty, felt more like a battlefield command center. A rotating team of specialists cycled in and out, each hoping to make sense of the escalating situation. None of them could. The body continued its silent war. The internal systems, now hyperactive, had gone beyond recovery. His metabolism accelerated to the point of breaking the station's nutrient infusion calibrators. The caloric demand exceeded 12,000 units per hour and continued climbing. Not even Deathworld predators required such intake. Muscle density was increasing, not just healing, strengthening. Fiber by fiber, the tissue reinforced itself, adapting its structure based on previously recorded trauma. Every wound, every scrape, every tear was not only patched, it became a blueprint for improvement. Scans revealed small calcium-rich nodes forming along the skeletal frame, support structures. Bones that had been fractured were now denser, layered with microscopic ridges to deflect impact. It was a kind of organic armor. This wasn't natural selection at work. This was preparation. The strangest change, however, was neurological. Brain activity spiked erratically throughout the day, even during unconsciousness. The frontal cortex, associated with awareness and memory in humans, remained unusually active despite the patient showing no external response. It was as if the brain wasn't asleep at all, but watching, listening, recording. The medics began to limit interaction. Every physical touch triggered a measurable shift in hormone levels. Adrenaline surged. Cortisol dropped. Heart rate stabilized unnaturally fast, regardless of environmental stress. Even sedatives, carefully dosed and rechecked multiple times, had their half-life cut in half. The body was burning through chemicals, as if it were filtering out weakness. Fear crept in quietly, not in chaos, but in avoidance. Medics took longer to enter the bay. Machines were programmed to minimize contact. Even automated limbs were delayed in their movements, just in case. The patient remained motionless, eyes shut, breath slow. But the room around him grew colder in atmosphere, more silent with each passing hour. And then, without warning, the internal monitors shut off. Not failed. Shut off. No alarms. No power surge. Just complete blackout from every biological sensor. Life signs vanished from the screen. Even the backup biometrics registered nothing. A quiet panic gripped the observation team. Had the anomaly died? Was this the end of the miraculous adaptation, or the beginning of something far worse? Before they could reach the chamber, a final data burst blinked across the master console. One line, unprompted, untranslated. Only later would the linguist decipher it. Do not touch. I am not finished. The cryptic message, do not touch. I am not finished, sent shockwaves through the crew. It hadn't come through communications. It hadn't been spoken. It was embedded directly into the Colaris Central Medical Console, slipped into the data stream like a whisper through locked doors. It wasn't possible. The human had never been connected to the system beyond passive monitoring. No neural links. No external interfaces. And yet, the data was there. Logged. Verified. Stamped with biometric confirmation from the very subject they'd been treating. Fear shifted into something colder. Respect. The medics pulled back entirely. Physical interaction was halted. All treatment was suspended. He no longer lay on a surgical table. He was placed in an observation vault, sealed in a pressure-regulated stasis chamber. Not because he needed it, because they did. Isolation was no longer about recovery. It was about containment. With time, deeper scans resumed from a safe distance. What they revealed only deepened the mystery. His genome had changed again, not in fragments, but across the entire structure. The previous anomaly, thermal autophagy, was only the beginning. His DNA now held sequences a computer couldn't decode. Strings of protein coding data that didn't match any known genetic map. They weren't broken. They weren't corrupted. They were encrypted. It was a first known instance of genetic data functioning like a firewall. A self-contained defense system within the DNA itself, resisting analysis, preventing replication, and reacting to invasive scans with deliberate countermeasures. Attempt to map the sequences triggered system errors. Memory cores failed. Whole data clusters became corrupted, as if the genetic code wasn't just offensive, it was actively hostile to being understood. Even the ship's AI flagged the genome as an aggressive foreign entity, not malicious, but too unpredictable to be categorized. One theory emerged that silenced every voice in the briefing room. The human's body wasn't just adapting to survive. It was evolving to evade understanding. Not hide, not run, but reshape itself into something so advanced, so fluid, that static science would never catch up. As if knowledge itself had become a battlefield, and the body had chosen stealth over surrender. Every hour, the subject's cells grew more efficient. Energy consumption began to normalize, yet strength indicators, measured by muscle fiber tension and nerve responsiveness, continued to increase. There was no sign of pain, no signs of rest, either. Only a steady, terrifying optimization. Eventually, even the observation equipment grew unreliable. Radiation shielding flickered. Magnetic containment warped. The chamber's environmental controls began to adjust themselves, as though the human's mere presence was influencing the very systems meant to monitor him. And then, late in the cycle, one more anomaly appeared. A single drop of blood, dark, viscous, and shimmering faintly under UV, slid down from the subject's nostril. It struck the floor and sizzled. Not burned. Sizzled like solvent on metal. The chamber resealed itself. Without command. Without protocol. He was still unconscious. Still unmoving. But the Kalaris crew understood something now with absolute clarity. He was no longer healing. He was becoming something else entirely. For 13 full cycles, the human lay motionless in his isolation chamber. No breath misted the glass. No twitch betrayed consciousness. He was perfectly still, yet every instrument that dared to scan him trembled under the data it returned. The term patient had long been discarded. So had subject. Now, among whispers and encrypted logs, he was referred to only as a prototype. What he was a prototype of remained a terrifying question. Outside his sealed chamber, the Kalaris ran in low-power orbit around the barren moon, where he had been found. No new data was gathered. Every attempt to analyze his mutated genome met with failure or system corruption. Remote readings showed his body had stabilized, but only in the way a dormant volcano stabilizes, silent, but alive with terrible potential. Then, precisely 13 cycles and 13 minutes after isolation began, the ship's gravity flux twitched. Only once. Enough for everyone aboard to feel their stomachs drop half an inch, their heads tilt ever so slightly as the artificial gravity realigned. Like the Kalaris had skipped a single heartbeat. It was not a malfunction. It was a pulse. The medics rushed to the observation bay. There, behind reinforced glass and containment fields strong enough to hold plasma storms, the human sat upright. Not gradually, not with groggy confusion. He simply was upright, awake. His eyes were open, but they weren't scanning. They weren't observing. They were remembering, as though he had just returned from somewhere no machine could follow. Vitals surged in a single unified spike. Heart rate, respiration, electrical activity. Everything synchronized like a system rebooting with a singular purpose. His muscles didn't strain. His body didn't shake. There was no fatigue. He moved as if the last 13 days had been spent building rather than healing. He stood without assistance. Monitors glitched. Magnetic seals flickered. His blood, once volatile, now flowed with consistency the sensors couldn't classify. Denser than normal plasma, yet humming with bioelectric activity. The chamber's atmospheric composition began to shift, not by external control, but by internal demand. The environment changed around him. The ship itself began compensating. He approached the inner door. No expressions, no aggression, just precision. He raised one hand and placed it flat against the glass. There was no command, no vocal activation. Yet the lock disengaged with a soft click. The door opened. No alarm sounded. No override activated. He simply walked into the corridor, barefoot, blood still drying beneath his nose, eyes burning like the vacuum of space, endless, cold, and filled with distant fire. Crew members froze. No one moved. No one breathed. He stopped, turned his head slightly, and for the first and only time acknowledged the others, not with a greeting, with a look that said, "You tried to save me, but I was never in danger." Then, as easily as stepping from one room to another, he disappeared into the ship's corridor, leaving only silence behind. If that story blew your mind, make sure to like, comment, and share with your fellow sci-fi lovers. Got a wild HFY idea or question about Deathworlders? Drop it in the comments. This is Starlight Sci-Fi, where the stars fear us back. Until next time, keep watching the skies and your blood pressure